"You will marry me tonight," the Mafia boss declared. To the fat black maid everyone laughed at. In a room full of powerful criminals and glittering gowns, the world froze as the most feared man in the city pointed to the one woman no one respected. She wasn't rich. She wasn't powerful. She was the maid the girl mocked in silence and forgotten by everyone. Until now. Dragged into a wedding she never wanted, forced into a marriage that made no sense, she thought it was just humiliation. But then, the bullets started flying, and she realized she wasn't just his wife. She was his only weakness. Enemies want her dead. His obsession makes her the most protected and the most hunted. But why her? Why did he choose the one woman everyone else treated like nothing? Was this marriage her cage? Or the most dangerous kind of love story? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The crystal glasses on Nia's serving tray clinked together as another burst of mocking laughter pierced the elegant reception hall. She kept her eyes down, focusing on the polished marble floor beneath her feet as she navigated through the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits. The Valente family's villa buzzed with celebration, another powerful union between crime families, another night of pretending not to see the darkness beneath the glitter. "Can you believe they let the help mix with the guests?" a woman in red silk whispered, loud enough for Nia to hear. "Especially that one. She's so large and dark, it ruins the aesthetic." Nia's fingers tightened around the silver tray, but her face remained carefully blank. 5 years of service had taught her the art of invisibility. She'd learned to move like a shadow, to breathe without sound, to exist without being seen. Usually, it was enough. Tonight, though, the cruelty cut deeper than usual. Perhaps she's hoping to catch a maid man's eye. Another guest snickered, swirling expensive champagne. Though she'd need 2 chairs at the family table, more laughter rippled through the nearby crowd. Nia's chest tightened, but she continued her circuit around the room. The crystal chandelier above cast rainbow prisms across her dark skin, and for a moment, she allowed herself to remember her mother's words. "Baby girl, you sparkle from within. Don't let anyone dim your light." But oh, how they tried. The wealthy guests in their $1,000 outfits, they worked so hard to extinguish every spark of dignity she possessed. Their words were elegant daggers, their smiles cruel masks. Nia had watched countless celebrations in this villa, served at hundreds of gatherings, and always remained invisible until someone needed a target for their amusement. She reached the far corner, where empty glasses awaited collection. As she bent to gather them, more whispers followed. "I heard she tried to get a job at the front desk. Can you imagine? A face like that greeting guests? Shameless. These people need to know their place." Nia's hands trembled slightly as she stacked the glasses. These people, as if she were a different species entirely. She thought of her artwork hidden away in her tiny room, drawings of flowers, of sunlight, of beauty they'd never understand. Dreams they'd laugh at even harder than they laughed at her appearance. The room suddenly fell silent. Nia felt it before she saw it, that distinctive shift in atmosphere that meant only one thing. Domenico Valente had entered the space. She'd learned to recognize his presence by the way others reacted, like prey animals sensing a predator. Even without looking up, she knew he was there. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant. Nia kept her head down, arranging glasses with mechanical precision. She'd served him countless times before, always careful to remain invisible, to never meet his steel-grey eyes. He was violence, wrapped in Italian wool, danger disguised as sophistication. The true power behind all the wealth that surrounded them. "Miss Johnson." His voice cut through the silence like a blade. Nia froze, her heart stuttering in her chest. In 5 years, he had never addressed her directly. She forced herself to turn, keeping her eyes lowered respectfully. "Yes, Don Valente?" The crowd had parted around him like the Red Sea, leaving him standing in a circle of space that no one dared breach. His presence filled the room, demanding attention, commanding fear. When she finally gathered the courage to look up, she found his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Put down the tray. His words weren't a request. They were an order, delivered in a tone that expected immediate obedience. Naya carefully placed the tray on a nearby table, her mind racing. Had she done something wrong? Broken some unspoken rule of service? These people, Domenico spoke to the crowd but kept his eyes on Naya, find humor in mocking a woman who has served this house with loyalty and dignity. They laugh at her appearance while displaying the ugliness in their own souls. The silence became suffocating. Those who had been laughing moments before now stood rigid with fear. Domenico took 3 measured steps toward Nia, his movement graceful and predatory. "You find her presence offensive?" His voice carried to every corner of the hall. "Then let me solve this problem for everyone." He stopped directly in front of Nia, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "You will marry me. Tonight." The words didn't register at first. They were too impossible, too absurd to be real. Naya's head snapped up, meeting his gaze fully for the first time. There was no humor in his expression, no sign that this was some elaborate joke at her expense. Gasps echoed through the hall, followed by confused murmurs. Before Nia could process what was happening, dark-suited guards materialized around her, creating a barrier between her and the stunned crowd. Reality crashed in like a wave. This was really happening. The most powerful man in the room, the man who controlled life and death with a gesture, had just declared she would be his wife. Horror bloomed in her chest as she realized the truth. This wasn't a rescue from humiliation. This was something else, entirely something that felt more like a sentence than salvation. The guard's presence made it clear she had no choice in this matter. No voice, no escape. The crystal glasses behind her continued to sparkle, casting rainbow lights across the scene like tears. The women's hands were everywhere, stripping away Naya's black uniform with brutal efficiency. Her protests echoed off the marble walls of the preparation room, but the Maid's women she'd worked alongside just hours ago avoided her eyes as they forced her into a white dress that belonged to someone else. "Please, stop this," Nia begged, her voice cracking. This has to be some kind of joke. But the trembling of her hands betrayed her understanding there were no jokes in Domenico Valente's world. The dress, meant for a slimmer woman, squeezed her curves mercilessly. Nia fought back tears as they yanked and tugged at the fabric, somehow making it fit. The other maids whispered prayers in Italian, crossing themselves as they worked. Their fear was palpable. No one dared defy Domenico's orders, not even to help one of their own. "Arms up," someone commanded, and Nia obeyed automatically, the habit of servitude too deeply ingrained. The white satin slid down her body like a cold caress. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The dress, though beautiful, felt like a costume or a prison uniform. "Your hair," one of the older maids murmured, pulling out Nia's neat bun. Dark curls tumbled down her back, and quick hands wove white flowers into them. The small blooms seemed to mock her with their innocence. The family chapel doors loomed before her, heavy oak carved with scenes of saints and sinners. Inside, the wedding guests who'd moments ago laughed at her now stood in tense silence. The whispers started as soon as she appeared in the doorway. "La domestica nera," someone hissed. "The Black Maid." Nia lifted her chin, refusing to shrink under their stares. She'd endured their contempt for 2 years. She could survive it now. The chapel's ancient stones seemed to pulse with candlelight. Domenico waited at the altar, his broad shoulders wrapped in a perfectly tailored black suit. He looked like he belonged there, among the gilt and grandeur. Nia felt like an intruder in white. Each step down the aisle was an eternity. The guests' faces blurred together, shocked, sneering, scandalized. Some wore barely concealed smirks, as if they were watching a particularly entertaining circus act. Others looked afraid, perhaps wondering what game their ruthless Don was playing. Domenico's dark eyes never left her face as she approached. His expression remained unreadable, but something burned in his gaze that made Nia's skin prickle with awareness. When she reached him, his hand shot out to grip her wrist, keeping her in place. His touch was firm but not painful, a warning, not a punishment. The priest spoke in rapid Italian, his words washing over Nia in an incomprehensible wave. She caught phrases here and there from her time working in the household, holy matrimony, and sacred bonds. The irony of those words in this forced ceremony made her want to laugh hysterically. "Si, lo voglio." Domenico's voice cut through her panic, deep and certain. "I do." When it was her turn, Nia's voice shook, but she forced the words out. "I do." What choice did she have? The weight of Domenico's ring slid onto her finger, heavy gold, marking her as his possession. Then his hands were cupping her face, and his mouth descended on hers. The kiss was nothing like the chaste peck she'd expected. It was possession, pure and raw. His lips claimed hers with devastating thoroughness, his tongue sweeping into her mouth when she gasped in surprise. Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading through her body like wildfire. She should have felt nothing but terror, but her traitorous heart raced for entirely different reasons. When he finally released her, Nia swayed on her feet. Domenico's arm wrapped around her waist, steadying her, pulling her against his solid chest. The message was clear, she belonged to him now. "She's my wife." Domenico's voice rang out, cold and sharp as steel. His words sliced through the murmuring crowd. "Anyone who laughs again dies." The silence that followed was absolute. Nia felt the tremors running through the assembled guests. They knew this was no empty threat. Domenico Valente's reputation for violence was legendary, and now, inexplicably, his protection extended to her. She looked up at him, trying to understand. His jaw was set in harsh lines, his eyes scanning the crowd like a predator seeking prey. But his thumb stroked small circles on her hip where he held her, an oddly gentle gesture at odds with his brutal words. The chapel's air grew thick with tension. No one dared move or speak. The candles flickered in their holders, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Nia stood frozen in the circle of Domenico's arm, her borrowed white dress suddenly feeling like armor rather than a costume. Whatever game he was playing, whatever his reasons for choosing her, she was now irrevocably bound to the most dangerous man in the room. The golden band on her finger caught the candlelight, winking like a warning. There would be no going back to her old life, no returning to the shadows of service. For better or worse, and Nia suspected it would be worse, she was now Domenico Valente's wife. Sunlight pierced through heavy silk curtains, pulling Nia from her fitful sleep. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar softness beneath her. This wasn't her narrow bed in the servants' quarters. The mattress felt like sleeping on a cloud, wrapped in sheets that probably cost more than she made in a year. Reality crashed back as her eyes adjusted to the room. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings. Antique furniture worth fortunes lined the walls. And there, draped over a velvet chaise, was the white dress from last night, her wedding dress, her prison uniform. Nia's hands trembled as she pushed herself up. Her old life had vanished in a single evening, replaced by this, whatever this was, marriage to a man who dealt in death. A gilded cage she never asked for. Voices murmured outside her door. Guards, she realized with a chill. Not to keep others out, to keep her in. She found a wardrobe filled with designer clothes in her size. The tags were still attached, the prices making her stomach turn. Someone had planned this, had known her measurements. How long had Domenico been watching her? After dressing in the simplest outfit she could find, black slacks and a cream blouse, Nia opened the bedroom door. Two armed men straightened to attention. "Mrs. Valente," one said stiffly, "you're free to explore the mansion, but we accompany you everywhere." "I'm a prisoner with a fancy title," she muttered, but started walking anyway. She needed to learn this place, find its weaknesses. The mansion was even more enormous in daylight. Her footsteps echoed through marble corridors as she wandered, the guards a constant shadow. Some rooms she recognized from her cleaning duties, but others had been off limits to staff. Now those doors opened for her. In the main kitchen, the head chef Marco barely glanced up from his work. "The help's entrance is around back," he sneered, then did a double take at her clothes. His face paled when the guards cleared their throats. "Sorry, Mrs. Valente," he stammered. "What would you like for breakfast?" Nothing. The thought of food made her sick. She left him sweating over his stove. The morning crawled by. Some staff members scurried away when they saw her coming. Others whispered and snickered behind their hands until the guards' hands drifted to their weapons. A few brave souls offered hesitant congratulations, their eyes full of pity. Near noon, Nia found what looked like a forgotten side door in the east wing. She casually wandered closer, heart pounding. The guards had fallen a few steps behind. If she could just... Going somewhere? The voice froze her in place. A guard she hadn't noticed stepped out from an alcove, his smile cold. "All exits are watched, Mrs. Valente." Boss's orders. Trapped. She truly was trapped. The day dragged into evening. She skipped lunch, ignored afternoon tea. Her stomach growled, but anxiety killed her appetite. When dinner time arrived, a maid appeared to escort her to the formal dining room. Domenico sat at the head of a massive table, looking dangerous and perfectly at ease in his tailored suit. He stood when she entered, an oddly gentlemanly gesture from a killer. "Sit," he commanded, indicating the chair to his right. Nia considered refusing, but exhaustion won. She sank into the chair, keeping her eyes on her empty plate. Servers brought course after course of exquisite food. Nia picked at each dish, moving pieces around without eating. She could feel Domenico watching her. Finally, he spoke. "Marco." The chef appeared instantly. "Yes, boss? My wife hasn't eaten all day. What was her favorite meal when she worked here?" Marco stuttered. I don't." "You never noticed," Domenico said flatly. "It wasn't a question. Find out. Now." The chef practically ran from the room. Minutes later, a server quietly asked Nia what she preferred to eat. There was leftover pasta arrabbiata sometimes," she admitted. "With extra chili." Within 15 minutes, a steaming plate appeared before her. The spicy aroma made her mouth water despite herself. She took a small bite, then another. "Eat," Domenico said quietly. Not an order this time. Almost gentle. She ate. Later that night, unable to sleep, Nia crept to her bedroom door. The guards had changed shifts, and these two were talking in low voices. "Made himself vulnerable," one was saying. "The Russo family's furious about the broken engagement. They'll target her first. Already got word the Bertellis want her dead too. Figure if they take out the wife, it'll destroy him. Never seen the boss care about anyone before. Better triple the security. If anything happens to her, we all die, yeah." Nia backed away from the door, heart hammering. She'd thought being Domenico's wife was dangerous enough. But now she had multiple Mafia families wanting her dead, seeing her as his weakness. She sank onto the bed, terror clawing at her throat. One day as a Mafia wife, and she already had a price on her head. What would tomorrow bring? The dining room gleamed with old money and danger. Crystal glasses caught the light from elaborate chandeliers, casting prismatic patterns across the mahogany table where Nia sat rigidly in her chair. Domenico had summoned her to dinner, and his invitations were orders wrapped in courtesy. She watched him from beneath lowered lashes, studying how he commanded the space without speaking. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, his movements precise as he cut into his steak. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the quiet clink of silver against china. "You've barely touched your food," Domenico observed, his accent thickening his words. His dark eyes fixed on her plate, where she'd been pushing around perfectly cooked vegetables. "I'm not very hungry," Nia managed, though her voice came out smaller than intended. The weight of his attention made her skin prickle. "You need to eat." It wasn't a suggestion. Before she could respond, the dining room door opened. Marco Russo, Domenico's advisor of 15 years, entered with quick steps. "Don, we have urgent business to discuss." Nia noticed something off in Marco's stance, a tension in his shoulders, a slight tremor in his hands. Before she could process why this bothered her, everything exploded into motion. The gun appeared in Marco's hand like a magic trick. "The Rossi send their regards." Domenico moved faster than Nia thought possible. One moment he was seated. The next, he had thrown himself across the space between them, covering her body with his as the first shot cracked through the air. The bullet shattered a crystal decanter behind them, sending shards and red wine raining down like blood. "Close your eyes," Domenico commanded against her ear, his body a wall of heat and muscle shielding her. She obeyed instinctively, pressing her face into his chest as 2 more shots rang out. Then came sounds that would haunt her nightmares. The wet thud of impact, the gurgling gasp of a dying man, the heavy drop of a body hitting marble floors. When silence fell again, Domenico's heart thundered against her cheek, his breathing controlled but rapid. "Look at me," he ordered, though his voice carried an edge of gentleness she'd never heard before. "Are you hurt?" Nia forced her eyes open, finding his face inches from hers. For the first time, she saw concern crack through his usual mask of indifference. His hands moved over her shoulders, down her arms, checking for injuries with surprising tenderness. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her whole body shook. "I'm not hit." Only then did she dare look past him. Marco lay sprawled on the floor, a growing pool of crimson beneath him. 3 precise bullet holes marked his chest. She hadn't even seen Domenico draw his weapon. "Guards!" Domenico's voice boomed through the room. Men flooded in immediately, weapons drawn. "Clean this up. Find out everything about his connection to the Rossis. I want names." He turned back to Nia, who couldn't tear her eyes from the body. This man had poured Domenico's coffee this morning, had smiled and bowed and called him Doan with apparent loyalty. Now he lay dead on imported marble, and Domenico's expression showed no more emotion than if he'd swatted a fly. "Come." He helped her to her feet, one arm still protectively around her waist. "We need to talk privately." They moved through the mansion's corridors, past hurrying guards and wide-eyed servants. Nia felt disconnected from her body, like she was floating above the scene. The only thing anchoring her was Domenico's steady presence beside her. He led her to his study, a fortress of dark wood and leather. Once inside, he poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass and pressed it into her trembling hands. "Drink," he instructed. "It will help with the shock." The whiskey burned her throat, but he was right. The warmth helped ground her. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You protected me," she said softly. "You could have been killed." Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "You're my wife." "I'm your prisoner," she corrected, though the words lacked their usual bite. "You're mine," he said simply, as if that explained everything. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheek with that same startling gentleness. "And I protect what's mine." The contrast made her head spin more than the whiskey, this man who could kill without hesitation, yet touched her like she was made of glass, who ordered deaths as easily as breakfast, but had used his own body as a shield for hers. Reality settled over her like a heavy cloak. She had been plotting escape since the moment he forced this marriage, but now she understood the terrible truth. The walls of this gilded cage weren't just keeping her in, they were keeping death out. In this world of blood and betrayal, Domenico Valente might be her jailer, but he was also the only thing standing between her and people who wanted her dead. His enemies would target her to hurt him. And, after witnessing the fate of those who crossed Domenico Valente, Nia knew with chilling certainty that any escape attempt could be her last. The morning sun filtered through the towering windows of Domenico's formal dining room, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Nia sat at the massive table, her plate untouched, while Domenico watched her from the head of the table with predatory focus. The silence between them crackled with tension. "Eat." His command cut through the quiet. Nia lifted her chin, meeting his steel-grey eyes. "I'm not hungry." That wasn't a request. Domenico's voice remained level, but danger lurked beneath the surface. His fingers drummed once against the pristine tablecloth, a rare tell of irritation. "I don't take orders about when to eat." She pushed the plate away, the crystal water glass trembling slightly at the movement. "I'm not one of your soldiers." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "No, you're my wife. By force." Nia's hands clenched in her lap, hidden beneath the table. Despite her defiance, her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd seen what this man could do, what he had done just yesterday in this very room. The memory of blood staining the floor made her stomach turn. Domenico stood in one fluid motion. Come, you'll accompany me today. Where? Suspicion colored her tone. Around the estate. You should know your new home. His large hand settled on the back of her chair, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the heat of him. Nia wanted to refuse, but guards lined the walls. Her choices were limited to compliance or being carried. With as much dignity as she could muster, she rose from her chair. They walked the grounds together. An odd parade of two, with armed men following at a discreet distance. The estate sprawled across manicured acres, all high walls and security cameras mixed with Italian cypress trees and elaborate fountains. Beauty and violence, just like the man beside her. The east. Wing houses my private offices, Domenico explained, his stride measured to match her shorter steps. You're not to go there without me. More rules? Nia scoffed. Why not just lock me in a tower? He stopped walking, turning to face her. His height forced her to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. You mock the measures I take to keep you safe. I mock being treated like property. She squared her shoulders. You may have forced this marriage, but you don't own me. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Not anger, but something deeper. His hand rose to her face, fingers hovering near her cheek without touching. So fierce, he murmured, like a little lioness in a cage. Nia refused to back down, even as her pulse raced. The lioness still has claws. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Good. You'll need them. They continued their tour, tension simmering between them. Domenico showed her the library, the conservatory, the indoor pool, all places she'd cleaned as a maid, but never dreamed of using. Now they were supposedly hers, though the guard's presence made it clear these were gilded prison walls. As evening fell, Nia retired to her room separate from his, though connected by a shared sitting room. She was about to prepare for bed when voices drifted through the wall. Domenico was on the phone in his study. I don't care what it costs. His voice carried clearly, though slightly muffled. Double the security. Triple it. A pause as the other person spoke. Because they'll try to take her from me. The cold control in his voice cracked, revealing something raw beneath. I won't. I can't lose her. Not like... He broke off. Nia pressed closer to the wall, heart pounding. Listen carefully, Domenico continued, his tone deadly quiet. Anyone who touches her dies screaming. Anyone who looks at her wrong disappears. She is everything now. Everything. Protect her with your life, or I'll take it myself. The phone call ended. Nia sank onto her, bed, mind spinning. She'd expected to be a pawn in some political game, a way to insult his enemies by choosing a black maid over their daughters. But this sounded like obsession, like possession, like something far more dangerous than a marriage of convenience. Hours later, she still lay awake, staring at the ornate ceiling. The man who'd forced her into marriage, who killed without hesitation, who commanded an empire of violence that man had sounded almost vulnerable when speaking about her safety. It didn't make sense. Fear still coiled in her stomach at the thought of being his prisoner, but now curiosity mixed with it. What had made the cold, untouchable Don so fixated on her? What had he started to say before cutting himself off? Who had he lost before? Sleep eluded her as questions circled her mind. Somewhere in this mansion, Domenico Valente was probably awake too, orchestrating who knew what kinds of violence in the name of protecting her. The thought should have terrified her more than it did. Instead, she found herself wondering if perhaps the cage wasn't meant to keep her in, but to keep something else out, and if her captor might be as trapped by his obsession as she was by his commands. Thunder crackled outside the mansion's thick stone walls as Nia tossed beneath silk sheets, sleep evading her. The storm matched her restless mind, thoughts swirling like the wind that rattled the windows. After 3 sleepless hours of staring at the ornate ceiling of her gilded prison, she kicked off the covers and slipped her feet into the plush carpet. The halls were different at night. During the day, they bustled with staff and guards, but now they held only shadows and whispers. Her bare feet made no sound as she wandered, trailing her fingers along the cool wallpaper. The guards stationed outside her room had dozed off, a rare oversight in Domenico's fortress of control. Lightning flashed through tall windows, illuminating unfamiliar corridors. Nia, found herself in a wing she'd never explored, drawn to a heavy wooden door left slightly ajar. Something about it called to her, perhaps the way it stood apart from the other doors, more imposing, more private. Her heart thundered as she pushed it open. The scent of leather and expensive cologne told her immediately whose space this was, Domenico's private office. She should turn back. She knew she should. But curiosity pulled her forward like an invisible thread. Lightning lit up the room in stark white flashes, revealing dark wooden shelves lined with books, a massive desk that dominated the space, and walls covered in what looked like surveillance photos. Nia's breath caught as she moved closer. They were photos of her. Dozens of them. Her hands trembled as she touched one, a picture of her arranging flowers in the conservatory, sunlight catching her face as she smiled softly at the blooms. Another showed her reading during her lunch break, curled up in a window seat she thought no one knew about. There she was helping an elderly maid up the stairs, sharing her umbrella with a gardener during a sudden rain, straightening a crooked painting in an empty hallway. Intimate moments, private moments, all captured without her knowledge. "How long have you been watching me?" she whispered to the empty room, her voice shaking. 8 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. Nia spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Domenico stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking any escape. He wore only black pants and an unbuttoned white shirt, as if he too had been unable to sleep. Lightning flashed again, casting harsh shadows across his face. "Why?" The word came out barely audible. He moved into the room with predatory grace, each step measured and deliberate. "Because you fascinated me." I was just a maid. She backed up until she hit his desk, trapped between polished wood and his approaching form. "No." His voice was soft but intense. "You were never just anything." He reached past her to touch one of the photos, her laughing with another maid in the kitchen. "I watched them mock you, belittle you, treat you as invisible, but you never broke. Never let them dim your light." His words sent shivers down her spine. "You sound obsessed." "I am." He didn't deny it, didn't try to soften the truth. His hand moved from the photo to hover near her face, not quite touching. "I lost my humanity long ago in this life. Thought it was the price of power. Then I saw you, how you stayed kind, despite cruelty, strong despite pain." Nia's chest felt too tight, her pulse racing. This dangerous man, this killer, had been watching her all along, had seen past her careful invisibility to something beneath. It should terrify her. It did terrify her, but it also made something warm unfurl in her chest. "You reminded me of what resilience truly meant," he continued, his voice dropping lower. "Not my kind, all violence and control, but the quiet strength to remain yourself when the world wants to break you." Thunder boomed, making her jump. He caught her arms, steadying her, and the touch sent electricity through her body that had nothing to do with the storm. His hands were warm, calloused from weapons but gentle on her skin. "I don't understand," she whispered. "If you saw me all that time, why marry me so suddenly? Why not approach me before?" His grip tightened fractionally. "Because I saw the Rossi family's son watching you too. He would have destroyed everything beautiful about you." Something dark flashed in his eyes. "I couldn't let that happen." "So you claimed me first?" There was anger in her voice now, pushing past the fear and fascination. "Yes. No apology, no hesitation. You were always meant to be mine. I just waited too long to take what belonged to me." Lightning illuminated them both as they stood frozen in that charged moment, her trapped against his desk, his hands on her arms, the evidence of his obsession surrounding them on the walls. Thunder rolled outside, deep and threatening, but it couldn't match the intensity in his gaze as he leaned closer. "You were always mine?" he whispered against her ear, his breath warm on her skin. "Whether you knew it or not." The words should have made her pull away in outrage. Instead, they settled into her bones like truth, frightening and thrilling all at once. She remained still in his grip, as another flash of lightning turned the world white, illuminating the photos that told the story of how a ruthless Mafia don had fallen obsessed with a maid who refused to break. Morning sunlight glinted off the polished black Mercedes as Nia settled into the back seat beside Domenico. 4 identical vehicles flanked them, 2 ahead, 2 behind, filled with heavily armed guards. The leather seat felt cool against her skin, but Domenico's presence beside her radiated heat like a furnace. "The meeting will take 1 hour," he said, his voice carrying that edge of command that brooked no argument. "You stay by my side, always." Nia nodded, her throat tight. After a week of being confined to the mansion, this first venture into the city should have felt like freedom. Instead, the weight of eyes watching her both protective and hostile made her skin crawl. The convoy wound through Milan's narrow streets until they reached an exclusive restaurant, its entrance blocked off by more of Domenico's men. Inside, the dining room had been cleared except for one long table, where 5 men in expensive suits waited. Their eyes locked onto Nia the moment she entered, barely concealed sneers twisting their faces. Domenico's hand pressed against her lower back, guiding her to a chair. The touch felt possessive, marking her as his. She recognized the power play, but couldn't help leaning into his strength as the rival Don's gazes scraped over her like sandpaper. "Valente," one of them drawled, his accent thick with northern Italian privilege. "You honor us by bringing your bride." The pause before bride dripped with disdain. Domenico's fingers tightened fractionally on her back before he pulled out her chair. "My wife," he corrected, the words carrying a deadly warning. The meeting began, discussion of territory and shipments flowing around Nia in Italian too rapid for her basic understanding. She focused on the elaborate place settings, counting wine glasses to stay calm. Then she heard a muttered comment in English clearly meant for her ears. "At least the fat ones are grateful for attention." The words came from a younger Don seated 3 chairs down. Before Nia could process the insult, Domenico moved. One moment he was beside her. The next he had the man by the throat, dragging him bodily across the table. China shattered. Wine spilled like blood across the white tablecloth. "You dare?" Domenico's voice was arctic cold as his fist connected with the man's face. Again. "You disrespect my wife." Another punch. Bone cracked. "You think I won't kill you where you stand?" The other Dons sat frozen as Domenico methodically destroyed their associate's face. His knuckles were red with blood, but his expression remained terrifyingly calm. Only his eyes betrayed his rage black with murderous intent. Nia couldn't look away. This was the monster everyone feared, the cold-blooded Don who'd built an empire on violence. Yet he unleashed this brutality to defend her dignity. The realization sent heat curling through her belly, equal parts terror and arousal. The beating only stopped when the young Don lost consciousness, his features nearly unrecognizable. Domenico straightened his jacket, bloody hands straightening his cuffs as if nothing had happened. "Meeting adjourned," he announced. "Next time, bring someone with manners." The drive home passed in tense silence. Nia's mind replayed the violence on loop, the controlled fury in Domenico's movements, the way he'd exploded at the first hint of disrespect toward her. Her body hummed with confused energy. That night, she paced her room like a caged tiger. The storm of emotions wouldn't let her rest. Fear tangled with fascination. Repulsion danced with desire. She needed something. Answers. Release. Understanding. Before she could think better of it, Nia slipped from her room and padded down the hall to Domenico's private chambers. The guards tensed but didn't stop her. They knew better than to interfere with the Don's wife. She found him in his study, jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled to expose forearms corded with muscle. His knuckles were bandaged now, but violence still clung to him like cologne. "Why?" The question burst from her lips. "Why defend me like that?" Domenico looked up slowly, his dark eyes capturing hers. "Because you're mine. I'm not property." She stepped closer, drawn despite herself. "You can't just..." "Can't what?" He rose, stalking toward her with predatory grace. "Can't protect what belongs to me. Can't punish those who disrespect my wife. I never asked for any of this." The words came out half sob, half accusation as he backed her against his desk. "But you're here now." His voice dropped to a dangerous purr. "In my room. In the middle of the night. Why is that, Kara?" Heat bloomed in her core at his proximity. I don't know. I think you do." His bandaged hand cupped her face, surprisingly gentle. "I think you finally see me. All of me. The monster and the man. And it terrifies you how much you want both." The truth of his words shattered something inside her. Naya surged up, crushing her mouth to his. Domenico growled, deepening the kiss instantly. His hands gripped her hips, lifting her onto his desk as papers scattered to the floor. Time dissolved in a haze of desperate touches and torn clothing. He worshipped her body with the same intensity he'd shown defending her honor, possessive yet reverent, demanding yet giving. When he finally claimed her, the pleasure was almost painful in its intensity. Later, wrapped in his sheets and his arms, Naya traced the bandages on his knuckles. She knew she should be running from this dangerous man who killed so easily. Instead, she was sinking deeper into his world, drowning in the intoxicating mix of protection and possession he offered. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that survival had nothing to do with it anymore. She was being consumed by him, body and soul, and she wasn't sure she wanted to fight it. Sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, casting a warm glow across Naya's face as she stirred awake in the silk-draped bed. Her fingers traced the empty space beside her where Domenico had lain just hours before. The memory of his touch lingered on her skin, both thrilling and unsettling. She sat up slowly, wrapping the sheet around herself as her gaze drifted to the garden beyond her windows. The past few days had shifted something between them. Their silent meals had given way to quiet conversations. His stern commands had softened into requests. Sometimes, she even caught him watching her with something that looked almost like tenderness, but doubt gnawed at her heart. This was still the man who had forced her into marriage, who killed without hesitation. Could she trust this gentler version of him, or was it another facet of his control? The morning routine felt different now. The staff who had once sneered at her now bowed their heads respectfully as she passed. Her old maid's uniform had been replaced by designer clothes that actually fit her curves. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling of being a stranger in her own life. After breakfast, Nia decided to walk in the gardens. The spring air carried the scent of blooming roses, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax. The high walls that had once felt like prison barriers now offered a strange sort of safety. She reached out to touch a velvet-soft rose petal. The attack came without warning. Rough hands grabbed her from behind. Before she could scream, a cloth pressed against her mouth, the chemical smell making her head spin. She fought, kicking and thrashing, but darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Cold concrete beneath her, rope biting into her wrists, a gag tight against her mouth. Her head throbbed as she forced her eyes open, taking in the warehouse around her. Dust motes danced in strips of light filtering through high windows. "The princess awakens," a mocking voice said. Through blurred vision, she made out 3 men in dark suits. One approached, crouching before her with a cruel smile. "Welcome to your new accommodations, Mrs. Valente." Naya tried to speak through the gag, managing only muffled sounds. The man laughed, reaching out to pat her cheek. She jerked away from his touch. "No need for that. We're all friends here. Just business partners having a chat about leverage." He straightened, speaking to his companions. "Make the call. Let's see how much the great Domenico Valente values his little pet." They moved away, voices lowered as they discussed ransom demands. Nia strained to hear, catching fragments of their conversation. Her heart pounded against her ribs as understanding dawned. This wasn't just about money. They wanted territory, control of shipping routes, immunity from retaliation. "She's the perfect weakness," one man said. The mighty Don, brought low by a maid he made his wife. The leader's phone rang, and he answered with a smirk. "Ah, Valente, missing something?" A pause. "She's alive. For now. Let's discuss terms." Naya watched his face change as he listened to whatever Domenico said. The smirk faltered, replaced by something like uncertainty. "You're bluffing," he snapped. No one would. He fell silent again, color draining from his face. One of his men stepped closer. What's wrong? The leader swallowed hard. He's listing our family's names, our children's, schools, our wives' daily routines. Ice settled in Nia's stomach. This was the Domenico she first knew, the ruthless Don who commanded fear with mere words. But then the third kidnapper laughed, the sound sharp and knowing. You really don't get it, do you? He turned to Nia, eyes glittering with malice. You think he actually cares? Poor little mouse, you were bait from the start. Nia went still, her breath catching in her throat. Valente's been planning this for months. Why do you think he chose you? A nobody. No family to protect you. No connections to complicate things. The man's words dripped with venom. He needed someone vulnerable, someone who would draw out his enemies so he could eliminate them all at once. The world seemed to tilt beneath her. Every gentle touch, every heated kiss, every moment she'd thought meant something. Had it all been calculated? Was she nothing more than a pawn in his game? Tears burned behind her eyes as memories shifted, taking on darker meanings. The way he'd watched her for months before the wedding. How quickly he'd moved to marry her. His constant surveillance, disguised as protection. The leader was back on the phone, voice shaking now as he tried to negotiate. But Nia barely heard him through the roaring in her ears. Her chest felt too tight, each breath a struggle against the gag and her own rising panic. In the dim warehouse, surrounded by enemies and stripped of illusions, Nia finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as sobs racked her body. She'd been such a fool, believing she could matter to someone like him, believing she was anything more than a means to an end. The concrete floor was cold beneath her, but the chill couldn't match the ice forming around her heart. In the shadows of her prison, Nia wept not just for her situation, but for the death of something fragile that had begun to bloom between them. Trust, perhaps, or even love. The crystal tumbler shattered against the wall, sending shards of glass raining across Domenico's office. His knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of his mahogany desk, chest heaving with barely contained rage. The guard who delivered the news about Nia's kidnapping cowered near the door. Find them. Domenico's voice came out as a lethal whisper. Find them now. Within minutes, his war room filled with capos and lieutenants. The air crackled with tension as Domenico paced like a caged beast, his usual iron control fractured by desperation. His dark eyes blazed with something his men had never seen before, raw fear mixed with murderous intent. I want every warehouse, every safe house, every inch of this city searched, he commanded, his voice gaining a dangerous edge. Call in all debts. Buy every piece of information. I don't care what it costs. One of his older capos, Marco, dared to speak. Don Valente, perhaps we should consider... Domenico's hand shot out, grabbing Marco's throat. Perhaps you should consider that every minute wasted means she could be dead. He released the man with a shove. My wife. They took my wife. The word wife carried such possessive violence that several men stepped back. Domenico's phone rang continuously as reports flooded in. Each dead end, each false lead, stripped away another layer of his composure. The Rossi family's shipyard, his intelligence officer reported. Their trucks were seen in that area this morning. Burn it, Domenico ordered without hesitation. Burn everything they own. Within hours, smoke rose from multiple locations across the city. The Rossi family's legitimate businesses, restaurants, clubs, warehouses all went up in flames. Domenico watched from his car as his men dragged Rossi soldiers into dark alleys. The screams that followed didn't satisfy his rage. In the underground casino district, whispers spread like wildfire. Ilfredo had finally cracked. The infamous Don who built his empire on calculated precision was now destroying millions in twort, assets over a maid-turned-wife. Some said he'd lost his mind. Others, those who had seen the look in his eyes, said he'd found something worse than sanity obsession. They're saying you're weak, his consigliere warned as another building burned. That she's made you unstable. Domenico turned, his smile sharp as a blade. Then they know nothing of strength. He checked his watch 6 hours since she'd been taken. When I find her, They'll learn what true weakness is. They'll beg for death before I'm done. His phone buzzed, a text message with coordinates. The warehouse district by the old port. Get everyone, he ordered, checking his gun. Every soldier, every weapon. I want that place surrounded. His men mobilized with military precision, but Domenico's hands shook as he loaded his weapon. The drive to the warehouse felt endless. Images of Nia bound, hurt, or worse tormented him. He remembered her smile at breakfast just that morning, the way she'd challenged him with those defiant eyes that had first caught his attention years ago. I should have told her, he muttered, grip tightening on his gun. Should have explained everything. The convoy of black SUVs moved through the city like a funeral procession. In their wake, they left a trail of destruction that would reshape the criminal landscape for years to come. 3 rival families had already pledged allegiance, desperate to avoid Domenico's wrath. Those who had mocked his marriage now scrambled to distance themselves from the kidnappers. As they approached the warehouse, Domenico's phone rang again. A young lieutenant's voice crackled through. Don Valente, we found 2 more of their men. They confirmed she's inside. Is she hurt? The question came out as a growl. They wouldn't say, sir. The phone crumpled in Domenico's grip. He'd killed for business, for power, for respect. But this would be different. This would be personal. The warehouse loomed ahead, a concrete monster squatting against the darkening sky. Domenico stepped out of his car, flanked by 30 of his most loyal soldiers. His usual calculated expression had transformed into something primitive, something that made even his hardened men nervous. Surround it, he commanded, voice thick with promised violence. No one escapes, no mercy, not until I have her. The men moved into position, their black suits blending with the gathering shadows. Domenico checked his weapon one final time, the metal cold against his palm. In his mind, he saw Nia's face, her strength, her defiance, the way she'd begun to trust him despite everything. They would pay for taking her. They would pay for making her doubt him. But first, he had to get her back, had to see her safe, had to explain why he'd watched her for so long, why he'd chosen her, why every calculated move had transformed into something real and consuming. Ready, came the whispered confirmation through his earpiece. Domenico moved forward, each step heavy with vengeance. The warehouse waited, holding his whole world behind its steel doors. And he would tear it apart to get her back. Metal chains bit into Nia's wrists as she knelt on the cold concrete floor of the warehouse. The dim light filtering through dusty windows cast long shadows across the faces of her captors. 3 men paced around her, their boots echoing in the vast space. The tallest one kept checking his phone, his scarred face twisted in anticipation. Valente's coming, he announced with a cruel smile. Time to send him a message he won't forget. Nia's heart hammered against her ribs. The words of the shorter captor from earlier still poisoned her thoughts. The Don picked you because you were perfect bait. A nobody. Disposable. The barrel of a gun pressed against her temple, cold and unforgiving. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to close her eyes. If these were her final moments, she wouldn't face them like a coward. Any last words for your husband? The man with the gun sneered. The warehouse door exploded inward with a deafening crash. What followed was pure chaos. Domenico moved like a demon unleashed from hell. His first shot took the gunman's head clean off before the man could even turn. Blood sprayed across Nia's face as the body crumpled beside her. The second captor reached for his weapon, but Domenico was faster. The bullet caught him in the throat, turning his scream into a wet gurgle. The third man, the one with the scarred face, managed to fire twice. The shots went wide as Domenico closed the distance between them. What happened next made Nia's stomach turn. Domenico didn't shoot him. Instead, he grabbed the man's head and slammed it repeatedly against a metal support beam. The wet crunching sounds echoed through the warehouse until there was nothing left recognizable as a face. When silence fell, Domenico stood in the center of the carnage, his expensive suit splattered with blood. His chest heaved as he turned to Nia, dark eyes wild with an emotion she couldn't name. In 3 long strides he reached her, dropping to his knees to break her chains. The moment her hands were free, Nia stumbled to her feet. Instead of falling into his arms with relief, she drew back her hand and slapped him with every ounce of strength she had left. The crack echoed through the warehouse. "Did you use me?" Her voice shook with fury and hurt. "Was I just part of your game? Bait to draw out your enemies?" Domenico's face transformed from concern to rage. He grabbed her shoulders, not roughly but with enough force to keep her from backing away. "You think I orchestrated this? You think I would risk your life for some fucking strategy? They said you chose me because I was nobody. Because I was disposable." Naya tried to wrench free, but his grip held firm. "I chose you," Domenico roared, his control finally shattering. "Because you were everything. I watched you for months, seeing your strength when they mocked you, your kindness when they didn't deserve it. You became my obsession, my weakness, the one thing I couldn't bury or control." His words hit her like physical blows. Naya stared at him, seeing the raw truth in his eyes. The mighty Don Valente, trembling with emotion over a maid everyone else had deemed worthless. "I killed my own father for being weak," he continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I built an empire on control and fear. Then you appeared, and suddenly I was the weak one, watching you, wanting you, breaking every rule I made because I couldn't stay away." Naya's legs gave out, and he caught her, pulling her against his chest. The front of his bloody suit was wet with her tears. "I don't know what to do with this," she whispered. "I don't know whether to love you or hate you." Domenico's hand came up to cradle her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. His thumb brushed away a tear, leaving a smear of blood on her cheek. "You'll do both," he replied, his voice dark with promise. "Forever." She shuddered in his arms, knowing he spoke the truth. Their love would always be this: beauty and violence, tenderness and terror, hatred and desire, all wrapped into one unbreakable bond. As his men filtered into the warehouse to clean up the carnage, Domenico lifted her easily, cradling her against his chest like something precious. The contrast wasn't lost on her. The same hands that had just destroyed 3 men now held her with infinite gentleness. He carried her past the bodies without letting her look, shielding her from the worst of the gore. Outside, the night air was cool against her tear-stained face. Domenico's heartbeat was steady under her ear, a rhythm that somehow made her feel safe despite everything she'd witnessed. As he placed her in the back of his armored car, his eyes never left her face. There was still blood on his hands when he brushed her hair back, but Nia didn't flinch. She understood now. This was who he was, who they were, together. A monster who killed without mercy, and the woman who made him human again. There would be no escaping it, no untangling love from violence in their world. She was his, marked by blood and chosen by obsession. And somehow, despite everything, she knew she would choose him too. Again and again, forever. In the luxurious bedroom that still felt foreign to her, Nia sank into the plush armchair by the window. Her body ached from the kidnapping, but it was her mind that couldn't find rest. Sunlight streamed through gossamer curtains, casting patterns across the marble floor, so different from the harsh warehouse lights she'd faced just hours ago. She traced her fingers over the fading marks on her wrists where the ropes had cut into her skin. Domenico had killed those men without hesitation, his rage transforming him into something terrifying and beautiful at once. The memory of blood spattering across concrete should have disgusted her. Instead, she felt a complicated mix of fear and security. Her new reality was a maze of contradictions. The same hands that had snapped a man's neck with clinical precision had cradled her face with heartbreaking tenderness. The voice that ordered death spoke her name like a prayer. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Maria, one of the household staff who had shown her kindness, entered with a silver tray. "The Don insists you eat something, Mrs. Valente," she said, setting down a bowl of fragrant soup. "He's called an emergency meeting of the families, but he wanted to make sure you were taken care of first." Naya's stomach churned at the title. Mrs. Valente, yet she couldn't deny the warm flutter it caused. "Thank you, Maria. Will he expect me there?" "Yes, my lady. He's ordered a dress be prepared for you." An hour later, Naya stood before a full-length mirror, barely recognizing herself. The black dress hugged her curves without apology. its elegant cut transforming what others had mocked into grace, commanding beauty. Domenico had chosen it himself, she learned, another sign of his obsessive attention to her every detail. The great hall buzzed with tension as she entered on Domenico's arm. Mafia bosses from across the region sat around a massive table, their faces masks of careful neutrality. She felt their stares like physical touches, some curious, others calculating, a few openly hostile. Domenico guided her to a chair at his right hand. The message was clear. She was no longer the help, but his equal. "Gentlemen," his voice cut through the whispers like steel. "My wife joins us today. Let there be no confusion about her position." His hand rested possessively on her shoulder. "She is a Valente now. Your respect for our family extends to her." Most nodded gravely, but one man, younger, arrogant, new to power, let a smirk play across his lips. "Quite a rise for her." The gunshot cracked through the air before he could finish. Naya didn't even see Domenico draw the weapon. One moment the man was sneering, the next he slumped forward, a red hole in his forehead. "Anyone else care to comment on my wife's background?" The silence was absolute. Even the dead man's own family didn't dare protest. Nia should have been horrified, but instead she felt a dark thrill. No one would ever mock her again. The meeting proceeded, but Naya barely heard the discussion of territories and alliances. She was too aware of Domenico beside her, his heat, his power, the way his thumb occasionally stroked her wrist as if he couldn't help touching her. Later that night, alone in their wing of the mansion, Naya paced the bedroom. Domenico watched her from the doorway, his presence filling the space like smoke. "You're not running," he observed quietly. "No," she admitted, stopping to face him. "I should want to. After everything I've seen, everything you are." She took a shaky breath. "But I don't." He moved closer, predatory grace in every step. "Why?" "Because you terrify me," she whispered. "But you make me feel safe at the same time. Because your violence should repulse me, but knowing it's all for me." She shivered. "It makes me want you more." His eyes darkened with hunger. "Say it clearly, Kara. No more games. I don't want to escape." The words fell from her lips like surrender. "I want to stay. With you. Even with all the danger, all the darkness. I want it. I want you." He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, gathering her against him. This kiss was different from their others. No force, no desperation, just pure, consuming passion. She melted into him, finally allowing herself to embrace the attraction that had terrified her. They made love with an intensity that stole her breath. Every touch was a claim, every kiss a promise. She met his possession with willing submission, understanding now that his control meant devotion. After, wrapped in silk sheets and his arms, Nia traced the scars on his chest. "I think," she murmured, "I was yours long before that wedding night. Every time you watched me, every moment you planned, you were marking me as yours even then." His arms tightened around her. "You were always mine," he agreed, voice rough with emotion. "I just had to wait for you to accept it." She pressed closer, knowing that tomorrow would bring new dangers, new violence. But here, claimed and protected by her beautiful monster, she was finally home. The warm Italian evening spilled through the villa's windows as servants bustled about, preparing for tonight's dinner. Nia stood at the grand staircase, watching the controlled chaos below with a mixture of amusement and nostalgia. Just 6 months ago, she had been one of them, scurrying around with trays and taking orders. Now, those same staff members bowed their heads respectfully as they passed. "Mrs. Valente," they murmured, the title no longer feeling foreign on her tongue. Even Sophia, who had once led the whispered mockery about Naya's weight, now practically trembled when asking for instructions. Domenico appeared behind her, his presence still electric after all this time. His hand settled possessively on her waist, and she leaned back against his chest. "Remember the last dinner party in this room?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "How could I forget? You turned everyone's world upside down, including mine." Nia smiled, remembering the shock on everyone's faces when he had declared she would be his wife. The dining room gleamed with crystal and silver, candles casting a warm glow over the polished mahogany table. Nia had personally overseen every detail, from the wine selection to the flower arrangements. This was her domain now, and she ruled it with quiet confidence. As guests arrived, other Mafia families, business associates, politicians, Nia greeted them with the grace of a born queen. She caught the glimpses of surprise in their eyes, seeing how naturally she had stepped into her role. The whispers now were of admiration, not derision. Throughout dinner, she felt Domenico's eyes on her. Even now, his obsession hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had grown stronger. When she spoke, he watched her with naked possession. When another man's gaze lingered too long, his hand would find hers, fingers interlacing in a gesture that was both tender and warning. Between courses, Nia caught sight of Maria, now her personal maid, directing younger staff members. Their eyes met, and Maria smiled, a real smile, not the forced ones from before. Nia had made sure to treat the staff with kindness, remembering her own days of service, but she also commanded their respect. They had seen what happened to those who crossed her or her husband. The conversation flowed as smoothly as the wine, but Nia noticed everything. The way the other wives studied her jewelry, her posture, her every move. The way the men measured their words carefully, knowing that to insult her was to invite Domenico's wrath. She had learned to wield her influence with subtle precision, just as Domenico wielded his more direct power. As the evening drew to a close, guests began to depart. Each farewell was accompanied by deep respect, some born of fear, others of genuine admiration. Nia had proven herself more than just Domenico's chosen wife. She had become a force in her own right. Finally, they were alone in the grand hall. Domenico turned to her, his eyes dark with emotion. In a gesture that still took her breath away, he slowly knelt before her. Taking her hand in his, he pressed his lips to her knuckles with reverence. "They will all bow to you, my wife," he whispered against her skin, "because you're the only one I'll ever kneel for." In that moment, Nia felt the full weight of their journey, from the shadows of servitude to the heights of power, from fear to love, from resistance to willing surrender. She was his salvation, just as he was her protection. His obsession had become her strength, his darkness her shelter, and his love her crown. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.